Thank you, sir. This next item is a directive to the federal government ordering the restoration of freedom of speech and preventing government censorship of free speech going forward.
We're going to close the border. We're not just going to close the border. We're going to deport people who came here illegally. We're going to change the idea that there is such a thing as anchor babies, or that just because you happen to be born here, that gives you full rights of citizenship. That's a fundamental change. He addressed crime in the cities. He addressed the problems of DEI and woke and the end of meritocracy. He criticized the inability of the military to turn tactical success into strategic victory or resolution. He talked about energy a lot, and that we were going to go full blast, and he was going to overturn prior directives. Joe Biden was sitting in the audience, of course. The point he was making is he called it a golden age, that everything was on the table. He only has 4 years, so he's moving ahead very quickly. He only has 2 or 3 seats in the House in the Republican majority. He doesn't matter. He only has 3 Senate seats. He doesn't matter to him. He's going full blast ahead. He called this, as I said, a golden age. It reminded me of the Great Seal of the United States, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order for the ages or for the centuries. That comes from Virgil's Eclogues, the great Latin poet, when he was talking about the birth of a new Roman generation, in particular descendants of Augustus, that would change Rome forever. And it's our founders in 1776 put it on the seal, and you see it emblazoned on the $1 bill. And that's the type of mood he's trying to encourage. But at the same time this happened, the outgoing president pardoned, first of all, the same day, so there would be no coverage really. It would be overshadowed by the inauguration accounts. He pardoned General Milley, who we remember called his Chinese counterpart to tip him off and warn him that he might have to have private conversations if Trump gave Milley an order he disagreed with. That Anthony Fauci he pardoned, who looked right into the television screens under testimonies before Congress and said that he did not help in any way or subsidize gain-of-function research. That was a lie. And then he pardoned the entire January 6th committee. And we know that in the case of Liz Cheney, she may have unduly influenced a witness and coached her testimonies without a lawyer being there. And there are some records that are missing. These are all legitimate areas of inquiry for future prosecutors. And yet he gave them a blanket pardon, Biden did. And then just 15 minutes before the speech, he pardoned the whole Biden family. For what? What did he pardon them for? For anything that turns up forever. 10 years, 20 years, 2 years, 1 month, anything we find about the Biden skullduggery that accounts for how they made $20 million from foreign sources will be fruitless and vain. Think of that. And here's my point. Trump was blunt, maybe even crude. He said he was going to eventually, we would have the Panama Canal. He was going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And people were kind of hysterical in their reactions. But it's the way he said it and his directness and his candor and his honesty that bothered them. But they weren't bothered to the same degree, if at all, that in sober and judicious terms, Joe Biden did something that we've never seen before. He has the greatest numbers of preemptive pardons we've ever seen by a departing president. What? Scandals of unimaginable size. So let me just conclude. One of the paradoxes of the entire Trump decade is that he speaks often crudely, bluntly, and truthfully about the problems confronting the country and his opponents. And then others who oppose him speak carefully or not at all, or with media approval, with the proper vocabulary, and what they're talking about or what they're describing is egregious. It's just astoundingly dangerous and detrimental to the country, and we don't seem to be bothered. It's always style over substance. Trump gave a tough, substantive speech that ushers in a new age without worry about criticizing the people in the audience who brought us this disaster. Biden stealthily, covertly pardoned a number of potential criminals in a way we've never seen before, and that was deemed okay. And that's the secret to the entire Trump paradox.
Donald Trump was a complete outsider, and we talked about that before. He was a gunslinger who came into town and cleaned things up, and he wasn't part of the town's city council. And that's what they wanted in 2016. They did not want it particularly in 2020. But they do again now because they've seen what happened in the interval, and they don't like the Biden 4 years, and they're saying to everybody, we've got to clean this up. The other thing is, I think very quickly, we concentrate on the crudity of Donald Trump, but if you are in a room with Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Donald Trump and other candidates that were on that stage, and you wanted to know who would be the funniest and the most at ease and the most authentic, they would probably tell you that Donald Trump was. They would like everybody else, but Donald Trump, he doesn't care. That's what they want right now. He doesn't care. Most people say, oh my God, I cannot go to jail, or oh my God, I've been indicted, it'll ruin my reputation. He doesn't care, and the people now have that same attitude. They got to the point where they don't care, and they tell you that. And we'll see. I don't think the judges, the prosecutors, and the juries understand that the more they go after him, the more he's gaining support from people who also don't care, and they're so angry. And a lot of them are in the black male community, the Latino. I live in a community of 95%, and my wife and I, we interact with all of our friends, and we have not met a Hispanic, Mexican-American male over the age of 40 who's voting for Joe Biden. They don't want, there's so many issues that they have problems with the left. If he wants to say current, then he's got to shift attention from himself to the agenda. I know that he has great confidence in himself, but he can say that I gave you this agenda. And everybody seems to agree that we have to restore the industrial capacity of the United States. We've got to be tough on China. We've got to have a border that's secure. Joe Biden blew up immigration law. It doesn't exist in America on the southern border. Nobody's talking about gasoline prices because, in their way of thinking, if they've gone up $3 and they went down 50 cents, that's a cut, but they're still much higher, and people know that. Inflation went from 9.2 and now it's 8.5, but 8.5 is extraordinary. So they don't want to talk about those issues, so what are they doing? So we had the January 6th commission, of which there was no Republican on the committee who did not vote to impeach Donald Trump or who had a political future. If he takes the third alternative, and that's what you hinted at, and he keeps dwelling on the injustices that were done to him, he's kind of like a Sophoclean Ajax, where the entire play is about all the wrongs that people did to Ajax, all of which were legitimate criticism. Everything he says has legitimate grounds, but it doesn't matter now. The matter is the future of the United States and the world.
Yeah.
And so
it really is that big, isn't it,
yes.
Victor?
The problem is he's put himself into a paradox where the effort to get justice, even if he were to achieve it, would be such a distraction and such controversy that his agenda would be overshadowed. And there's people all over the United States that need that agenda. And so Donald Trump is going to have to decide which is more important to him, to be the leader of the Republican Party and to look ahead and not to do what he did in 2020 when he fixated on the election. He let the Georgia races, the 2 Senate races, sort of, he basically told his supporters the vote won't be valid. And then the independents, he seemed to be distracted, so they elected 2 neo-socialists in Georgia, of all places. People who are running for office are going to tell him the 2020 election is history, and to the degree that there is a legitimate criticism about the outcome, it was probably lost in March and April when the voting laws were changed, and that was not addressed by the Republicans. And right now we need to look at the future. And each moment that you go back there, you play into the fake narrative of an insurrection and fascism, and that's what they want you to do. The problem is with the Republicans that they are reactive. Well, we're not insurrectionists. They're reacting in a news cycle to these melodramas that are concocted. And it's taken a lot of momentum, at least, out of them. I don't think it'll change, but at some point, some adult in the Republican Party is going to have to say, do your worst, and we're going to do our best. We're going to have a national agenda, and it's going to be the antithesis of this disastrous 2 years, and we're all going to be on the same page, and this is what we're going to run on, and I think they'll be okay.
No country would take 12 million people in 4 years. No country would take felons. No country would destroy their own border. No country would do that. $150 billion while Americans are losing their jobs with a trade surplus from Mexico, given what they're doing to us. No country would do that. So we just have to speak very kindly and softly and carry a huge club and not get loud and carry a twig. Donald Trump said an executive order to begin, I'm pretty sure, to stop catch and release. So you're not going to catch anybody and just say, here's a little ticket, show up. And we know 2 million people will never showed up. And he said, if you want to be a refugee, you apply in your own country like every other country. You just don't fly into France and say, I'm a refugee. You apply from Somalia. And I think he's made it clear whether that was an executive order, I'm not sure, but he's said that the wall will begin immediately. So he's already taken measures. I just hope that he taxes remittances, and I hope he stops the expensive flights that the Mexicans hold hostage by not allowing us to land. When they came by land, and so they shall pass through by land. I don't know what he means by having Greenland. I think what Donald Trump is trying to emulate is something like the United States experience with Greenland during World War II. Let's remember that the Wehrmacht overran Denmark in 4 days in World War II. And then Greenland was severed. Government wanted to have bases in Greenland and therefore avoid this empty area, or expand this empty area in which Americans could not attack them by air. In other words, air patrols from Britain and air patrols from New England or bases in Canada could not cover the entire Atlantic corridor for American cargo ships to Britain during the early years of the war. So Weed said, there is no more Denmark. So we're going to go in there and use Greenland as a base to fill that gap and ensure there's air cover. So what Trump is saying is that these conditions have arisen again, and that China and Russia are in a race to claim the Arctic, as is going on with the Antarctic, and they are appropriating Greenland's airspace, sea space, and northern corridors. And when you put into the matrix that we may have a Northwest Passage very soon, and I'm told that some ships can navigate it with some danger, but given the problems in Panama, and if it were to be opened, it might be just as quick. And the point that I'm making then is you don't want Chinese and Russian ships blocking that or using that in the way that China is trying to squeeze the Panama Canal. And then additionally, Denmark has if Denmark was a unapologetic champion of Western civilization and said, look, we have things in our past, but we're better than the alternative. No, they've been very EU-ish. And yet they are a imperial power. A little tiny country operates imperialist, colonialist power over this vast continent, which, as I've said before, is closer to New York City than it is to Copenhagen. And if you look at the map, it's not part of Europe where Denmark is. It's part of North America where America. Does that mean that Trump wants to invade it? No. Does that mean he wants to plant? What he's trying to do is allow them to have a open ballot on, just like we allowed Puerto Rico. Remember that? We said you can have Puerto Rico's had, I think, 1 or 2 plebiscites. They can either vote to be independent, they can continue to be a commonwealth, or they can vote that they want to be a state. And then we react to that in various fashions. So they're going to have a plebiscite, apparently, and Greenland can say, we like the status quo, and I think that'll be the end of it, or we want to be autonomous, and then we're free to choose who and how we conduct our foreign relations, or they want to be part of the United States, as Trump would. I imagine that if they had the choice, they would probably want to be autonomous, with one big exception. They, like Denmark, cannot defend themselves. And when a Chinese warship came into their harbor, there would be one person they'd call. And that's Trump's point, isn't it? He's saying to Denmark, yes, you have sovereignty, and yes, Greenland, but when things get rough, and they're going to get rough, believe me, given the nature of the governments in China and Russia, when you get squeezed, either by Russia in your area of the world or Greenland, the person you call is the United States. We know that because it happened in World War II. We know that because you were not part of the Soviet bloc because of NATO, which was an American-run and subsidized operation, and we know it in the post-Cold War. So we want to have certain concessions. We want more access to bases, and we want to have our companies pay a fair price of royalties for mineral extraction or whatever. And that's what he's talking about.